This past week, my family got to go down and enjoy some time on the beach, and we were just talking about how this year there wasn't much beach. The tide was so high, and the storm was all week long, so we'd go out there, and there wasn't very much of an area to walk along, but it was fun to see the raging storm and the calm at the end after. I think it was Saturday morning when we got up to come home. It calmed down, and the sea was nice and pretty, but it was beautiful, beautiful time. And I wanted to say once again, thank you guys for the gift that we got to enjoy this past week, and the money that was given to us. I'm not sure exactly how to start this, so I'll just dig in here and we'll see where we go. I was thinking about the story of Zacchaeus. You guys are all familiar with the story of Zacchaeus. We sing the song about it, you know, wee little man was he, all that. But when you stop and think about the story of Zacchaeus, it can be found in Luke chapter 19, by the way, if you want to follow along. In Luke chapter 19, Jesus is walking with his disciples, and there is a crowd that is following him. And I want you to imagine this picture with me as he's walking along, and the crowd is following and crowding in upon him, and maybe asking questions, and he's talking to them, and things are going along, and there's a big enough crowd to where a little man named Zacchaeus, he couldn't see. So he runs ahead, and he climbs up in a sycamore tree. You guys remember that? Well, he climbs up in the tree, and as he's looking for Jesus, with this crowd around him, Jesus comes to the tree, and he stops. And he looks up, and he says, Zacchaeus, come down from there. I'm going to go to your house today, and I'm going to eat with you. I want you to think for a moment. You've been walking with him. You've been following along, waiting for an opportunity to ask the question that you had. Maybe even just get close enough to hear all of the things he's saying. And all of a sudden he stops. And he calls to a known criminal. In reality, in their mindset, it would have been somebody who was a criminal. Because this man was a chief tax collector. Now, the tax collectors weren't really thought too highly of, but this guy is a chief tax collector, and as I understand it, he had multiple tax collectors under him. So he would go and encourage them to take money from you and hoard it for himself. Some, of course, was passed on to the Roman government, but whatever he could get that was above and beyond what they needed was his. And so he would mistreat financially those underneath him. And so as you're going along and you're listening, trying to hear Jesus, and maybe you've been for days trying to get close enough to him to talk to him, or whatever it might have been, and then all of a sudden he calls Zacchaeus out of this tree. And maybe your thoughts would be, oh, finally, somebody's going to call him on the carpet for everything he's been doing, you know. It's about time he got his desire, you know. And as you're sitting there, you're waiting for this, Jesus says, I want to go to your house and I want to eat with you. Wait a minute. You're going to go eat with him? You don't realize who he is, obviously, because he's the chief tax collector. And Jesus says, I'm going to go eat with him. Now, the question in my mind is, what would his response be? What would Zacchaeus do? Now, if Jesus had called him down out of that tree and said, Zacchaeus, I've known what you've been doing, and I do not approve of this, and he went on to talk about all of the bad things that he had done, I wonder what Zacchaeus would have responded to that. But instead, he responds by saying, I want to give back what I have stolen.
Amen.
I I want to restore what has been taken from these people. And he said, I'm going to give half of my wealth to them. And anyone that I have wronged, I'm going to give 4 times as much back to them. If I have taken something unjustly, I will give 4 times as much back to them. What changed his heart? What happened? It doesn't tell us what Jesus said, but it does tell us what he did. I want to jump to Matthew chapter 20. And I want to tell you a story about a vineyard. A worker in the vineyard, and Jesus tells this parable. He starts off by saying, "For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire men to work in his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them into the vineyard. About the 3rd hour, he went out and saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. He told them, 'You also go and work in the vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right.' So they went. He went out again about the 6th hour and the 9th hour and did the same thing. About the 11th hour, he went out and found still others standing around, and he asked them, 'Why have you been standing here all day long, doing nothing?' 'Because no one has hired us,' they answered. He said to them, 'You also go and work in my vineyard.' When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, 'Call the workers and pay them their wages. Begin with the last one hired and going on to the first.' The workers who were hired about the 11th hour came, and each received a denarius. So when those who were hired first, they expected to receive much more. But each one of them also received a denarius. When they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. 'These men who were hired last worked only 1 hour,' they said, 'and you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day.' But he answered one of them, 'Friend, I am not being unfair to you. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the man who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous? So the last will be first, and the first will be last.'" Now, the story that I just read, you might not see a parallel or connection to the story of Zacchaeus, but I want to ask you a few questions. My first question is if you were wanting to motivate someone to work, how would you go about doing that? What would be the desire for someone to work? There are 3 major motivators. One is fear, one is a reward, and the third is love. That one's not talked about very much. But when we fear something, we're going to go out and do it. You know, your mom and dad says, if you don't go do this, I'm going to spank you. That's fear, And you do it because you know you don't want the punishment that's about to come. So that's motivating by fear. That's usually a short-lived motivation, because eventually you get to the point where you're old enough, you're big enough, you don't want that anymore, whatever it is, and you rebel or you go against it. Fear might be a good motivator, but it doesn't have very much lasting effect. Now, rewards are something that we offer someone so that we would be able to enjoy the benefits. So, if you would do this, I will do this. And that's what it starts out at. If you remember the very first of the story, he says, "If you will come and work for me, I will give you a denarius." And as I understand it, the denarius was actually quite a big sum for a day's labor. That would be a generous sum, and not just your normal day's wages. So they were glad to work for him and came and gave their full day's work. The reward that we have is something worth working for and something we can enjoy. If we go back in our history And I was doing a little bit of digging last night and just trying to find what kind of motivated people to do things. Money is a big motivator. That reward of money. Position, if we are willing to dedicate ourselves and give ourselves to the business, then we will move up the ladder and we will become a higher position so that we will have people working under us and we won't have to work so hard, but they can work for us. You know, that's a reward, something we can get to enjoy. During the Industrial Revolution was some of the first of this to happen. Because originally, when you worked your farm, you got the benefits of your garden, you got the benefits of the land, the cattle you raised, whatever. That was the reward that we got. And it was usually in a direct correlation to the work that you put into it. Whatever you did, that's what you received as a reward. But whenever the Industrial Revolution started, then things kind of changed. Because now we are going to work and we come home, but the work is done there. And so the direct correlation of our work isn't the end product, it's the pay that we get for doing the work. And so it kind of changed things up a little bit in our history. And so now we are, as a nation, as a world actually, we get paid for things that we do in a workplace. And then we come home and spend the money at home. And that's, or from home. Especially today with the internet, we can just stay at home and spend all of our money we made all day. But the idea of motivating someone to work. If I was trying to motivate someone to work, I probably would not have told the story that Jesus told. Because the story that he tells is about someone working 1 hour. So the 11th hour he comes to work, gives 1 hour, and he gets paid the same amount as somebody that worked 12 hours. Amen. So tomorrow, I'm going to wait until the 11th hour to go get my job. So that, that's the kind of mentality. And so I'm thinking to myself, why would Jesus do this? Why would he tell a story about work habits that we wouldn't think would be good, and it wouldn't motivate us? But I think the secret of this comes from the very end of his story. When he talks about that he is a generous landowner. He says, don't I have the right to do what I want with my money? Or are you envious because I am generous? You see, this is a parallel, of course, with our life with God. And the world here that we live in and we enjoy. And towards the end of our life, it might be the 11th hour, we come into a relationship with God. And then we die. And we have a reward of heaven. And we might look at that and say, well, that's not fair. I've been a Christian since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. And how can somebody that just became a Christian, how can they have the same benefits that I do? And Jesus says, wait a minute. Is it okay if I choose to be generous with what I have? You see, I think what Jesus is trying to communicate is love. He wants us to love as he loves. To love without restriction. If we go back to the story of Zacchaeus in Luke chapter 19, and we look at that through the eyes of Jesus, not from the eyes of us. I want you to think for a moment. If you were wanting to help somebody come to a point where their life was different, not just the outcome. I work hard, I get paid well. I don't work hard, I don't get paid well. Not the outcome of everything, but what about the root of everything? Where does it all come from? I want to change the heart. Whenever I went to work at Microsoft, I'd worked in the corporate world. I'd worked in different lines of work. And I went to work at Microsoft, and the very first thing I noticed was these people liked their jobs. I mean, they came to work, and they would stay, sometimes way into the night. And they didn't get paid more because they stayed longer, because they were salaried. It didn't matter how much they worked. They got paid the same amount. But they would get involved in something, and they would end up spending the whole night. A lot of us had couches in our office. Why? Because at the end of the day, when you're tired, you'd lay down on the couch and you'd sleep for a little bit, and then you'd get up and keep working again. And these people would stay the whole night. They even had showers downstairs, so that if you stayed all night, you could go get a shower and get freshened up for the next day. That sounds crazy, but they really enjoyed their jobs. They enjoyed doing what they wanted. It was kind of an interesting thought. What if people enjoyed doing their jobs so much that you didn't even have to tell them to come to work? You don't even have to tell them what time to show up. You just let them do their jobs. If they really enjoyed it, it would change everything. Microsoft presented a different kind of working environment than any other business world that I had ever heard of. It would show up on magazines and all kinds of news articles because it was on the cutting edge of this work environment. It had other problems. I'm not trying to glorify it as a great business, but it did have something that they motivated because people loved doing what they were doing, and they enjoyed the time at work. Now, Zacchaeus. I want you to look at this through the eyes of Zacchaeus. What would he hear that would cause him to want to give up his fortune? In Luke chapter 19, Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but being a short man, he could not because of the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree, to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and he said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. So he came down and at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to murmur, he has gone to be the guest of a sinner. But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anyone out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, because this man, too, is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save what was lost. It doesn't tell us what Jesus said or did, but it does show us. It shows us that Jesus invited someone into his life.
Yes.
Someone that was despised by many, hated by a lot, not liked by hardly anyone. And yet Jesus says, come on, let's go have lunch together. And because he did, people criticized him. People criticized Jesus. But Jesus had a plan. And I think if you ponder this a little bit, you might come to the same conclusion that I did. That Jesus showed him love. He showed him he cared. He showed him that he was important to him. And by doing that, Zacchaeus got a message. The message was, I'm important. I'm not just important to the Roman government. I'm important to God. And I'm not living the way I need to. And he says to himself, I need to make a change. I need to change the way I'm living and give my life to God. And so he does. And when he does, the result is, I want to right the wrongs that I've done.
Yes.
I don't believe Jesus said any of that. I don't believe Jesus gave him any commandments or any lists of things to do. I think he just shared with him his heart. And the response was, I want to do what's right. Whenever we look at the story of the workers in the vineyard. We could probably see the same thing happen there. That those who came late, that still got the benefit of the full amount of labor, what would their thought have been of this man? He is a very generous, kind-hearted man, right? Now, tomorrow, what are those people's response going to be? You know, I think I'll go back and work for that guy again. And I'm going to give him my time. I'm going to give him my whole energy. The ones that showed up early in the morning, they might try to come late at night and show up and get even that way. I'm not sure. But Jesus said that I came to seek and save the lost. That's what Jesus is wanting to do, is to save those who don't have their life right. And so he's reaching out to them, and he's giving them an opportunity. He's telling them, I care about you, I love you, I want you in my kingdom. And the response that they give is one of giving their whole hearts willingly to him. Again, if I asked you, how would you motivate someone to do what is right? You might come up with an idea of making a list of all of the commands of everything that they need to do. If you'll do all of these commands, then you'll be good. Or if maybe a list of things to do, if you can accomplish all of these tasks, then you'll be good. But what if somebody came to you and says, I love you, and I want to give you this gift, free of charge? If you can imagine for a moment showing up to the gates of heaven, and there's two gates. One gate over it says, you've earned salvation, line up over here. This one is, you desire a gift of salvation, line up over here. I think a lot of people would line up at the gate that I've earned it. I've done good. I've been a good person. I'm a good man. I've done good things throughout my life. My good outweighs my bad. But most of us would line up on the side of, I haven't earned it. I know I'm not good enough. I know I haven't done enough. As a matter of fact, there would be most of us that would line up at that gate realizing that we came to him with empty hands. And we are going to enjoy the gift that he has given us, that he has already given us. The Pharisees would have been the ones lining up at the gate saying, I've earned it, I've done enough, I've accomplished this. When in reality, they were the furthest from it. Some people call it the upside down kingdom, that Jesus has established an upside down kingdom. Those who are first shall be last, those who are last shall be first. What does that mean? It means that God is offering the gift of salvation to those who don't deserve it. To those that have tried to earn it, to be the best that they can be, to do it on their own, they're trying to accomplish something that God has already shown us is not possible. We can't be good enough. But for those who are trusting in God and putting their faith in him, he loves them, he cares about them, and he wants them to walk with him. When I first started, I said I'm not sure exactly where to start with this, because it's something that I think we often overlook, that God loves us so much that he's presenting to us something totally different than the world has to offer. The world says the harder you work, the more you do, the better off you are. God says the more that you surrender your life to me, to give you life to me, the more you benefit, the greater good that comes. I think God wants to show us how much he loves us. I think he wants to give us that opportunity to know him. Now, take that and present that to someone else. How do we make a difference in someone else's life? When we show grace, mercy, acceptance, love to those in the world that maybe deserved it, how would they respond? When we see people who might not be someone we would look at as a role model, but yet we would say to them, we love you right where you are, right where you are existing today. If you do that, what kind of a difference is that going to make in their lives? How is their life going to be affected? It may be just like Zacchaeus, where he says, I realize that I've had my focus on the wrong thing. I've been focusing on money and wealth and power. No, I don't want that. That's not where my focus needs to be. I realize that there's something greater. That is the love of God.